both scientists and mystics have a certain sense of perception of what the future is bringing. And scientists often are surprised by what comes. What they expected did not come, and what they didn't expect comes. But I believe the mystic sees farther and more deeply. What do you see as the emerging technologies on the horizon for humanity?
Well, I think, first of all, Sraddhalu, to continue your sentence, mystics are used to being surprised. They are used to being amazed. They're used to, in a way, dealing with what they don't know, because the mystic works on the threshold of consciousness. It's not something that's so understood in our culture, but really the mystics have always been the pioneers of consciousness. And one of the things that happens when you get to the edge of a state of consciousness, or you go into a new state of consciousness, is it's completely different to anything you could ever have imagined before. And my sense is that the humanity has the potential to make a shift in consciousness that would take it into a place that we cannot even imagine. And so that's the difficulty I have with people predicting or imaging the future, is that they think of the future in the terms of the present or the past. And my sense, the little I've seen, is the future, when it comes, and it might take 100 years to come, it might take 10 years to come, is that it will be completely different to anything we can imagine, because it is not born from the past. This shift in consciousness is not a linear progression. It's not born from the past, but is born from the eternal present. And that's why I think it's really important to keep those essential human values that will be needed in the future, but not to get caught up in any sense of prediction, because we were predicting it with the images in our mind that have been created by the past. And in the same way as in the 70s, one could not imagine the internet and how it has become so central to our present life, the technologies of the future will be quite different. And a lot of what we think will be important in the future will not be important in the future. And there are very basic considerations, which is, are we going to move into an expanded technological future, or are the technologies of the future going to be much more simple, more localized, more human in that sense? So I think it's important to work with the tools of the present, but not be limited by any sense of prediction, because as the mystics say, the one thing you know is that you don't know. And also, I have a friend in Australia who describes the present world situation like a Zen koan. And as you know how a Zen koan works, it has two opposites, or a particular predicament, like how do you take the goose out of the bottle without hurting the goose or breaking the bottle? And the answer comes from a completely different dimension, when the answer is, it's out. It happens, and it happens in a completely unexpected way, through a shift, through breaking a certain mental framework that has imprisoned us in the image of the koan in a particular thought form. And the present world predicament is so dire, and humanity is so unprepared and seemingly unwilling to do anything other than tinker at the edges, that it is like a Zen koan that might possibly flip us into a completely different level of perception. Or it might not, and then we will be looking at what one might call a dark age, where human evolution goes backwards.
At a moment of transition like this, what would you suggest those in the field of technology can do to help the transition?
I think the people working in the field of technology should be open to change, but not imprisoned by their vision of where that change could lead. and particularly not be caught up in the next best app or what will make them a fortune, because then they limit the possibilities that technology has to offer. And that's why if you have approached technology from a place of greed or a place of acquisition, then the technologies itself, just as our consciousness reflects itself into our environment, the technologies will be limited by the attitude we bring to them.
So what should they look for?
What should they look for? I think a lot of technology at present is self-perpetuating. It creates itself out of itself, and the people working in those fields follow that thread. I think very, very occasionally, as with the World Wide Web, there is an individual or a small group of individuals who are given the seeds of a new technology which they can then bring into being. But that is, most people working in the field of technology, they are caught up in the mental thought forms of technology. And so they can't look beyond their present perception, which is creating more on the same plane that already exists. And for example, there are many revolutions in the field of solar power, but something fundamental has not yet happened because they all work within a certain paradigm.
There are those who see technology as fundamentally a problem, and there are those who see technology as something which is a solution, and then there are those who say technology is only a tool. What matters is how we use it. What makes technology good or bad, or what's the right attitude to relate to technology and use it?
That is a big question. What makes technology good or bad? Technology is not just a tool, because some technology is almost alive, and some technology is also alive in a negative way. It feeds off people's light, it feeds off their higher intentions, it makes them buy things they don't want to know. The whole present desire for data mining and taking everybody's personal data is solely for personal gain of those who want to use it, or for the power of information. And so it itself has generated many, many negative thought forms around it, or a culture of acquisition, of taking people's information just because they can, power for power's sake. I do think it is both simpler and more complicated. I think one would have to, in a way, look at 100 years in the future and see what the technology that from this time of transition. Look, in any time of transition, as with the startup companies of the dot-com boom in the 1990s, there were many ideas, but few of those boom ideas have remained, have prospered. And again, this is too new a field to understand its implications. Maybe in 100 years' time, when this is the first wave of technology, will have risen and fallen, and then there can be a sifting on what technologies are really in service to humanity and what belong to its infancy. So I think one needs to have a certain awareness that certain technologies can help the whole of humanity. I think the smartphone is a wonderful invention because it can be accessed by people in Africa, by people in Asia, who thus skipping the whole need for telephone lines and telephone cables, and it can give people financial access and information access and communication access they couldn't otherwise have. I think that is a tremendous gift. But there are many other technologies that really only serve the people who make them and who then create a desire in people to have them that is unnecessary. And it's the difference, if you like, between need and desire, or between need and want. And sadly, part of the technological revolution has been mastering how to create unneeded desires. And this is very dangerous because it is addictive both inwardly and outwardly, and is fostering a self-destructive civilization that feeds upon itself in a very dark, almost vampirish way that people don't understand. And I see part of the problem is that as a culture we are apparently moving too fast to really be concerned about the long-term effects of what we are doing, or the effects on the inner of what we are doing, let alone the effects on the earth of what we are doing. So I do not think there's an easy answer to this, Sraddhalu. But I do think there will be a sifting within the next century, depending, of course, on human population and the state of the world, of technologies that really are in service to human beings, or we will have entered a dark age in such a way that maybe the energy sources that present technologies require will no longer be available, and the technologies will have become obsolete. And that's a very real possibility. But
the younger generations which have grown up with this kind of technology and the access that it gives are somehow different. They think differently from the earlier generations. On the one hand, there is the need for instant gratification. They can't hold attention for more than 8 seconds. On the other hand, they now know that all information is available, and there is a shift from needing information to applying and using it in a different way.
Yes, the younger generation is different because they have grown up with immediate access to the internet, for example, in many parts of the world, although of course not in all of the world. The difficulty here is it has changed the thought patterns, but I do not know how lasting that change of thought patterns would be if, for example, the technology was no longer available. I heard an interesting discussion of some of the Middle Eastern cities that grew in size exponentially and were the centers of culture, and people's lives benefited very much from being part of an urban culture, and then either through a climate change or through war, those cities could no longer be sustained. And the archaeologist was asked what happened to the people, and he said they went back and became farmers and lived a much more simple life. So it could only take, 2 or 3 generations, if the technology is not functioning anymore, for that particular mental conditioning to revert to what it had been before. So we live in such an immediate culture that people want an immediate response to the present predicament, but humanity has a longer history, and I'm reluctant to answer questions on the immediacy, because I think of human beings on a longer term perspective.
One last question. You spoke in the earlier presentation of the internet as a gift from the self to manifest a deeper unity.
Yes.
Even as this technology unfolds in humanity, and even as it is used and misused, is that presiding consciousness who gave the gift working still? Will it help to bring about a higher utilization?
That's a very deep question. It is inherent within the internet because it is not separate from the internet. The question really is, at what point do we take responsibility for it rather than reacting as children who have been given a gift? And if we take responsibility for it, both on a human level and on a spiritual level, then its gift can expand exponentially. And it can, like a tree, it can provide the fruit of many gifts that are inherent within it, embryonically. If, however, we don't, then the consciousness that is within the internet will recede, and we will just be left with a tool that we can use or misuse. But as you rightly say, there is an inherent consciousness within the internet because it belongs to the plane of the self, and it was given as our spiritual development. And I firmly believe that there is a possibility the internet can come alive in a way that this Indra's web of consciousness, which is really what the internet is. There are nodes of greater consciousness, and there are smaller nodes, and there are these web of connections of human consciousness, patterns of relationship, organically changing patterns of relationship that contain within it the higher consciousness of the whole, because within the collective of humanity there is the consciousness of the whole of humanity, and that's why I said it needs to be connected to the earth in some way, which hasn't happened because it also, humanity is connected to the earth. We are sustained by the earth, and we are nourished and fed by the earth, and the earth is very generous. And the consciousness of the internet, that's why I said the web of light needs to be connected to the web of light. The patterns of consciousness need to be connected through certain hubs, through certain individuals, to the pressing need of the time, which is the regeneration of the ecosystem.